As Dr. Richard Rohrbaugh says, whenever you move the language, you necessarily change the meaning. Whether it's words or sentences, language only means what it means, where and when you use it. For example, take the word Satan. Today, Christians mean by Satan the personification of evil, the one in whom all evil is focused. It is a proper name given to the devil or Lucifer, the fallen prince of the fallen angels. The late scholar Raymond Brown and other biblical scholars explain that the biblical material written before the 4th century BCE does not give much indication of belief in a devil, in this sense of the word normal to us, by our biblical ancestors in the faith. After the exile to Babylon, a good deal of Persian influence came into Israel thought and practice. And that's where we see a belief evolving in a principal force of evil and in hordes of demons. Clearly, the New Testament writers shared the earlier view of Israelite understandings concerning the reality of the demonic. And subsequent Christian theology, right down until our own day, has regarded that belief as serious and normative. Hashatan, the Satan, was originally a Persian concept. When the book of Job was written, at the time that the Persian colony of Yehud was under the imperial and cultural influence of Persian Empire, Hashatan, the Satan, was not yet an evil guy. He was not yet a bad guy. In fact, the Satan would not be seen as a malevolent figure until around the 2nd century BCE. Also, the devil, like all the angels, or constellational other-than-human spirits that are part of God's fancy entourage in the sky, was another Persian concept taken from their sky lore. At the time of the composition of Job, around the 4th century BCE, and for a long time following, the devil was one thing, and the Satan was a completely different concept, a completely different spirit or other-than-human person. In other words, in Israelite thought, for a time, the devil and the Satan were two different persons. Now, do you remember that talking snake back in Genesis chapter 3? The one that tricked the first human beings? Well, for a very long time, that mischievous talking snake, originally a shamanic power animal, was yet another completely independent concept and a completely different other-than-human person or spirit. And originally, that talking snake was also not seen as evil, but mischievous. By the time, way later, when the book of Revelation was written in the Third Wave Jesus groups, various Israelite groups had merged all three of these personalities together into one. Also at that point, where they all three, the talking snake, the Satan, and the devil, were now seen as being one and the same person, that person was seen as being evil. The original concept of the Satan was very different. The original concept of the Satan, notice that that's not his name, but rather the title of his office and his function, was something like a secret agent figure who spies on behalf of the Persian ruler. He's the honor tester of the court. He goes out disguised as a peasant on behalf of the king and tests the loyalty of his subjects. Earning a peasant's trust, he asks his new friend what he thinks of the ruler. Should the peasant reply with something dishonorable about the king, then the Satan reveals himself to be an agent of the throne and arrests the offending person. This kind of Middle Eastern Satan exists well into modern times, most recently seen in the role of King Hussein of Jordan. The idea of the Satan as honor tester is what various Middle Eastern folks have in mind when they refer to the United States as the Great Satan, and the former Soviet Union and the Russian Federation as the Lesser Satan. It's not a degrading insult. The idea is that God is using these powers to put their loyalty and honor to the test. Now, Americans, when we hear us called the Great Satan, we botch it, misunderstand it. We have a different kind of Satan in mind. The author of the book of Job sees God through the Middle Eastern, specifically Persian, cultural lens. This human author was not a monotheist, but rather a henotheist. Monotheism is rare in the Bible, Hebrew and New Testament texts. At the beginning of the book of Job, the God of Israel, that's God of Israel, ethnocentric henotheism, sits atop the dome of the sky having a party with all of his sons around 4 p.m. every day. This Most High God, henotheism, not monotheism, says to his Downton Abbey fancy entourage of constellational other than human persons in the sky, "Hey, look down there at my servant Job. He's a real loyal Mediterranean man." And the Satan, not an evil guy, officer of the court, responds, "Of course he's a great guy. It's because you spoil him. Who wouldn't be loyal to you when you treat him that good?" So the high God says, Okay. Well, put him to the test. Screw with him a little bit. Just don't kill him." And the original story, as well as the much more complicated second version of the book of Job, follows. The relationship between honor testing and this Satan spirit continued to stay in the forefront of its meaning well after the merger of Satan, serpent, and devil, and long after that merged person got seen as evil. Satan puts Jesus to the honor test. Temptation is a bad translation. When Paul, in his writings, uses the term Satan, he means by it the same meaning, the one who puts you to the test. The New Testament retains this more ancient meaning, and you see it in the Matthean Our Father prayer, not properly translated as, "Lead us not into temptation," that's bad, but rather, "Preserve us from the honor test." And who's us? Peasants. At some point in the history of ancient Israel, not too distant from New Testament times, the Satan figure, again, merged with the devil and the talking serpent, and became a gigantic dishonored constellation consisting of Libra, the scales, and Scorpio, seen by some ancient Middle Eastern peoples as a titanic seven-headed dragon in the sky. Somewhere along the way, a sky lore evolved among the Israelites, where the Satan, now proper name, Satan, attempted a coup d'etat in the sky vault, apparently at the beginning of time when creation of the sky vaults was underway. This narrative got picked up in various places in the New Testament, by the Lucan Jesus in Luke chapter 10, verses 17 to 20, and by the astral prophet who wrote Revelation, especially Revelation chapter 12 and 13. The book of Revelation was heavily influenced by Enochian literature. By the way, when I speak of first century Israelites, I am not referring to later Judaism or Jews, despite our anachronistic biblical mistranslations. No, I am speaking of the root of our Jewish brothers and sisters' traditions, and our Christian traditions, and Muslim brothers and sisters' traditions. I am speaking of various first century sectarian Judean customs and lore. None of these were Christian either. Nothing Christian before 325 Common Era. All Abrahamic peoples of faith, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim, are the heirs of these Judeans' treasures. We Christians, together with our Jewish and Muslim brothers and sisters, have baggage in our traditions left over from henotheistic times, and even from before that, from ancient polytheistic times. All our God talk, all our theology is analogy. All analogy is rooted in human experiences, and all human experiences are culturally specific human experiences. All scriptures are and contain theologies. Monotheism is a concept that took a long time to evolve. Question: what do you need in order to have monotheism develop? Well, you need a human cultural analog for only one God. What would that be? Well, you need a world empire which has only one world emperor. First, that came in Persia, the origin place of monotheism, the origin place of the Satan, the origin place of the devil, and the origin place of Zoroaster. In Persia, now Iran, they speak Farsi. 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 Sounds a lot like Pharisee. But monotheism, seen briefly in Isaiah chapter 40 through 55, written under Persian influence, just didn't catch on in the Bible and later Israelite circles. It wouldn't really begin to evolve again until Roman times in the Israelite Jesus groups and other traditions. Eventually, you have Trinitarian monotheism in the Christian church, and you have a more severe monotheism developing into the 6th century in what would become Judaism and Islam. These Abrahamic groups impacted and influenced each other in dialogue. God's love is messy. God works in the mess. And so, to this day, we all have this henotheistic baggage left over. Baggage that evolved in part to explain why evil and suffering exist in the world. Why the avalanche of social problems that wave in on us constantly exist. And these theologies evolved because people wanted to reverence God and honor God, and not attribute to God direct control or micromanagement of everything to the point where God directly wills evil and suffering. Even though the existence of the devil is normally considered part of infallibly taught Catholic doctrine, I have to admit, it is a very modest doctrine indeed. The doctrine does not insist on the popularly conceived horrific or even comical depictions of the devil and the demonic that so many devotionalists depend on in order to imagine their picture of the devil. Nor does the doctrine describe the devil or specify plurality in it. Jesus' proclamation of the forthcoming theocracy, the kingdom of God, was bound inexorably to opposing a personal evil force in the world. Even though the church's theology has evolved for 2,000 years through varied and different cultural milieus, and even though we have come to understand in the risen Christ, kingdom of God is something far more than an Israelite political theocracy, nevertheless, our proclamation of God's kingdom is likewise bound up with deliberate resistance to evil and injustice, such as that avalanche of social injustices and structural evils that plague us. But in this Western culture, we do not attribute every sickness we suffer to an other-than-human person or demon.